Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Smolensky, and I'm here to just try to briefly walk everybody through a piece of research that I conducted around interviewing respondents from the SUS survey that we do every quarter. For some context here, there was a UX key review meeting. I think it was a little over a month ago. And during that, Eric Johnson asked the question, do we know if our users feel if usability has improved over the past year? So that's what this particular piece of research set out to find out. And the way that this was done was a set of interviews. So I reached out to people that had filled out the SUS survey from Q1. And there's a total of 12 of them. So mainly to really understand those differences in perception and GitLab usability from a year ago till now and see what the difference is. And because this is qualitative research, I was able to go in and understand the why in back of that. So got a lot of really great information, and that's what I'm going to just walk through. So top takeaways, we'll start with the bad right away. There was a major theme that was surfacing up, and it was around learnability. And it was actually the most common reason why these participants felt that GitLab was not easy to use. It was hard to learn, and I'll talk about that with some examples. There was some good though. So on average, over the past year, these participants felt that there was a very slight improvement. That's the mean average to usability within GitLab. So very slight. But there was a big surprise that I was not expecting. And there's a main reason behind their ratings, and I'll talk about that, but essentially it was whether they were getting used to GitLab or not. So that was a shocking surprise to me, and I'll go into detail around what that actually means. So first, the differences between a year ago versus today. So participants were asked how difficult or easy it is to use GitLab on a scale of 1 to 7. They were asked to think back a year. There are some challenges with that, and I outline that later on in the deck if you want to read that. And then I asked them the same question now in the context of today, and we can see the differences on their ratings on the chart on the right there. So some are positive and some are no change at all, and some are negative. So half felt that it's easier today. 3 out of 12 felt there was no change from a year ago. And another 3 out of 12 felt that it was more difficult today. So when we look at the mean across these, there's a very slight positive increase from a year ago to today. So we might think, okay, that's promising a little bit. But again, since it's qualitative, we're able to kind of go in and understand the why. So what I did, I looked at the positive and I started to ask, okay, well, why? Because I was personally expecting to see some concrete examples around usability changes that may have been made that these participants could be experiencing. Instead, the main reason behind these scores was that these participants, they eventually got used to it. So let that sink in a little bit. That means that they didn't necessarily all see usability improvements, but they got used to the experience that they do within GitLab. So shifting gears a little bit to the participants who found either a negative change over the past year or no change at all, I also asked why. And the main reason behind their ratings, they didn't get used to it. It was hard for them to get used to. It was hard for them to learn. So this was a little shocking to me, and I started to think a little bit about some of the questions in SUS that we ask, because if you don't know, we asked 10 total questions. So there's one question in particular that aligns directly with learnability, and it's question number 10, which is I needed to learn a lot of things before I could get going with GitLab. Now, this question we traditionally score the lowest on. In fact, just last quarter, we scored 58.8, which is by far the lowest score at a per question that we have. By comparison, our overall SUS score last quarter was 68.1. So it's over 10 points away from that alone. So this tells me there's definitely something big here around learnability. We do have past data from previous SUS surveys that learnability constantly shows up. But this is one of the first times that I know of where we just happen to go in a little bit deeper into it. The interviews that I conducted reveal that there are really 4 key factors behind this. The first is there's an aspect of non-technical users that are in the mix. There's a learning curve that people called out. And there's navigation and discoverability that are also impacting learnability. So what I will do next is go through these very high level, just to really introduce each and every one of you to what these are. The non-technical users, this group struggles tremendously. For them, GitLab, it's difficult to learn and use. These are people that might be product managers who may not go into the code at all, but they're using it for issues, things like that, for updates. And it's hard for them to really go into it for just a view on one thing that might be an update within an issue, because there's everything else around in the UI that doesn't really pertain to them, but it's intimidating, it's overwhelming. The shocking thing that I found also was that it's impacting adoption with this group, with some of these participants. And I highlighted those quotes in yellow here for everyone to see. Interestingly enough, too, technical users who use GitLab, let's say engineers, for example, they're also negatively affected by non-technical users they work with, because they're the ones who are coming to the technical users saying, hey, I need your help with this. Can you help me understand how to use GitLab with what we need to do? So it takes them away from their job. So that was surprising to me. The second key factor was the fact that there's a learning curve and it's relatively steep. This was where people were talking about getting used to it. They flat out called out that the learning curve is huge. That's a quote there, that it's complicated, that they have to pass that learning curve. And you can even, at this point, just pause and imagine that learning curve for non-technical users is probably even steeper. So there is somewhat of a correlation as to whether these participants did or didn't get used to GitLab and their perception of how usability changed over the last year. So the learning curve plays a factor there with usability. The last 2 key areas are a little closely related: navigation and discoverability. Just at a high level, navigation, it's viewed as difficult to learn and use. It's complex. There's a lot of items in the navigation. I know that we're making navigation changes as I speak, so I think we're on the right track there. There's a discoverability piece too, and this is a little closely related to navigation, but essentially it's really hard for some of these users to find and learn about new features that may or may not help them. It's a little scary for them too to go off that beaten path that they have used GitLab for over a long period of time. So I'll just briefly pause real quick. And at this time, some of you may be formulating a question in your mind where like, it's essentially, if this shows a slight increase in usability perception over a year, then why does SUS keep declining over time? Actually, Christy asked this question to me, and I thought it was worthy enough to put in a slide in case others start to think about this. So the short answer, we don't know. This research, it really doesn't answer that question. As a reminder, the SUS is built out of 10 questions total, and this research happens to focus on just one of those questions. So we can't really draw a direct comparison between those two sets of scores. But the important thing to focus on is the why, and that goes back to the learnability issue that we saw here. I'll also call out that thinking about new users too, whether they're technical or non-technical, just considering that steep learning curve, it really puts new users off to a really rough start. And we get more and more of those every day as we grow. So something to consider. There was also another angle that I took within this research, and it's really just kind of understand how if they felt that usability has changed over the year, which is a little bit different than the two rating questions I asked earlier. And I'm glad that I asked it this way because I was able to see a slightly different view on things. About half, roughly, it was fairly split here, whether they felt that it changed over time. So that's actually, I view this as some good news because there was some people that were noticing it, that things are constantly improving. There's new features that might be simplifying things. And in terms of the flip side of this, if people did not notice anything, they were essentially, it was fairly aligned with what they were saying earlier, where it's like their worn path is where they stick to. And they may not have noticed anything because maybe nothing really changed in how they use the product. So I'll just point out there was a lot of bonus content that I also got that I wanted to also share. Feel free to look through this. There's a full slide around feedback that we got on the doc site. And I have two full slides around MRs, just feedback around that. And there were some miscellaneous pain points as well. And if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about our participants, I threw together a couple slides there. I think I'll call out just two things real quick. One, I did look at how they scored within the SUS survey, just to make sure I was in the ballpark around, do my sample participants represent the larger group sample that filled out SUS? And we can see by the scores here, we are relatively in the ballpark. So that's good. It's not like I was just talking to people who scored all low or all high. So this makes me feel better about the data. And lastly, we did target people that were using this for at least a year and a half, mainly because of my question where I needed to find out a year ago how they felt about it versus now. So on average, they were using it for about 3.5 years. And lastly, some information about their job title too. So there's also some links in the appendix and a few other things, but I'll stop here for now. If anybody has any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about research, and especially this study. This was a lot of fun. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.